Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and Spider-Man Far From Home has an amazing trailer that gives us our first official look at the sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming, and our first look at Marvel Phase 4, which will apparently move on from the tragic end of Infinity War the same way we move on from anything depressing, by pretending it never happened. Mr. Stark, I feel terrific! Woo! Yeah, somehow Marvel and Sony pulled off a Far From Home trailer that doesn't overtly spoil anything for Avengers Endgame, but features just enough little Easter eggs and cryptic clues to keep us guessing. It's maddening! But I got you covered with a frame-by-frame breakdown of everything you might have missed, including some extra footage from the international trailer, and of course, spoiler warning in case any of my predictions end up being too right and they ruin your life. Let's get started.
Thank you, Spider-Man!
That was so good. Hey, sorry I'm late. Happy.
You look nice.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you. New dress?
Yes, it is. How'd you know?
What just happened?
Okay, this opening clip takes place at a charity benefit at the Salvation Army to aid the homeless. This could be a nod to Spider-Man's volunteer work with Feast in the Spider-Man PS4 game. Aunt May, Marissa Tomei, now knows, of course, that Peter is Spider-Man. She did see him in his suit in the final shot of Homecoming. Now, the directors of Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, the Russo brothers, revealed that Aunt May did survive the snap, but Peter Parker definitely did not. So let us address this elephant-sized dust pile in the room. How the hell is Peter Parker alive again? Many are suggesting that the events of this movie must be a prequel and that Peter's Euro trip must take place before Infinity War, like that school bus that we see him on could have been returning from the airport. But Far From Home definitely is not a prequel. In Infinity War, shortly after that scene, Peter told Tony Stark that he was actually on his way to a field trip. And Marvel head Kevin Feige said Far From Home would be about moving forward after Infinity War and after Endgame. And Sony head Amy Pascal said separately that Far From Home would start a few minutes after Endgame ends. And while movie directors and movie execs have made coy and cryptic statements in the past, I just don't think they would outright lie about this. Rather, I just think the fact that Peter Parker is alive again is a result of however the Avengers will end up fixing things in Endgame. On this channel, we've explored a number of theories, traveling through time to destroy each of the Infinity Stones before Thanos could get his hands on them, or maybe splitting into an alternate reality or alternate timeline where certain characters survive. The amazing movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse introduced us to the concept of the multiverse, and how, while Spider-Man might die in one dimension, he can certainly live on and grow older and fatter in another. And maybe that's what we're seeing here. Maybe that's why no one is referencing Thanos or the snap, because it didn't happen to these people. This Spider-Man could just be far from the home we're familiar with. I see what they did there. Now, there are a few other fun Easter eggs in this section. The framing of Spider-Man facing the reporters and the fans seems to reflect the famous panel from the Civil War comics when Peter Parker removes his mask and reveals his identity to the press conference. Also, look closely at the lower left. You can see a little girl wearing a homemade paper plate Spider-Man mask. Now, don't make fun. You gotta be crafty with your cosplay when you're homeless. I'm wondering if this could actually be a nod to that moment in Iron Man 2. Remember when Stark saved the little boy who was wearing the Iron Man mask? That boy, Kevin Feige later retconned as a young Peter Parker. I guess that's supposed to be Tom Holland under there. So maybe this girl, Spidey fan, could grow up to be Gwen Stacy in the MCU. Though I guess that would require Peter to become the Lizard. I don't know, we'll see. Also, if you look closely, you can see the big check that Happy Hogan brings in for $500,000. It's from the Stark Relief Foundation, and it's signed by Pepper Potts, CEO, of course, of Stark Industries. Now, Happy flirts with Aunt May, kind of like how Tony has done in the past. We do know that Happy also survived the snap, so who knows? Maybe back over in the darkest timeline, post-snap over there, these two grieving survivors who each lost loved ones consoled each other and hit it off. And maybe that's why they have this kind of flirty, metaphysical chemistry. I love talking timelines. Let's move on.
Planning a trip?
Mm-hmm. Going to Europe. It's a school trip.
Did you get your passport?
Peter Parker here to pick up a passport, please.
Okay, as Peter packs for the trip, he visits Del Mar's Deli in Queens. Now, we saw that get destroyed in Homecoming, but check out those newspaper front pages behind the counter. Top Queens bodega destroyed in blast. Top bodega, nice. Also, some pictures with Del Mar with Spider-Man and what looks like Barack Obama. So it sounds like the bodega has been repaired. And if you look at the lower edge of the frame, Murph the cat is okay too. Next, we see Peter texting while swinging. Not safe, but I love how he flips his phone to his other hand when he changes hands to swing. But look closely behind him. Two important details here. One, notice how the top of Grand Central Station has a new statue to honor the cops, firefighters, and relief workers from the Battle of New York. But that's not the only way this version of Manhattan is recovering. Looky, there's a new building being constructed behind Grand Central. Now that could be the old Avengers Tower. It's actually based on the spot that the real-life MetLife building is located in the city, right adjacent to Grand Central Station. Of course, in Spider-Man Homecoming, Stark and Hogan were in the process of moving everything out of that tower. And now it appears that a new owner is taking over the location. One theory is that this could be Oscorp, potentially introducing Norman Osborn and Green Goblin to the MCU. Though in that case, that would mean that Oscorp building couldn't appear in any other non-Spider-Man Marvel movies, since Osborn and all those Spidey villains are still owned by Sony. Marvel would have to get special permission from Sony to just feature a shot of it. But another option for this new building, it could be the Baxter Building. That's the headquarters of the Fantastic Four. Now, of course, the Fantastic Four were previously a Marvel property owned by Fox, and now with this merger with Disney, some Fox Marvel crossovers could start happening in Phase 4, though I think this would still just be too early, considering this whole deal probably won't be finalized until March. We also see Peter picking up his passport from the post office, and look closely. Peter's birthday is listed in August, the same month that Amazing Fantasy number 15 was released. That was Spider-Man's first comic book appearance. And also notice how there are no years printed on the passport. Nothing for Peter's birth year, nothing for the issue date. Now this doesn't make sense. All passports have to have years printed on them. But I think this exclusion is a deliberate move. Like perhaps the events of Avengers Endgame will affect the timeline to influence what year Far From Home takes place in. And the editors of Far From Home wanted to avoid revealing too much in this trailer, and maybe the theatrical version of this shot will show us the year. But also, you gotta remember, Spider-Man Homecoming was the movie with that huge, dumb 8 years later title card mess that directly contradicted the main MCU timeline and confused the hell out of us nerds. So it seems like Far From Home has learned the lesson that when it comes to timeline details, less is more. On to the next clip.
Need toothpaste? Pack your suit.
I just want to go on my trip with my friends. Europe doesn't really need a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Here we see Peter packing in his bedroom, deciding to leave his Spider-Man suit at home. He just wants to enjoy his vacation. But as we see in the international trailer, Aunt May actually packs it anyway, along with some spare web fluid and his web shooters, leading to this hilarious scare at customs.
These no.
No banana. Great.
Also, looking closely at Peter's bedroom here, you can see that he's a Mets fan with a Mike Piazza pennant and a Star Wars Imperial Star Destroyer toy on his shelf, just like he had all the Star Wars toys in the first movie. And he's wearing another nerdy shirt, that old geometry joke with the problem find X and then the arrow circle. I found it. But check out his luggage. There's a big Easter egg here. BFP. This is Uncle Ben's suitcase, Benjamin F. Parker, probably for Benjamin Franklin Parker. Now, he doesn't have an official middle name in the comics, but his character was modeled on American founding father Ben Franklin with all of his wise adages. Until now, Uncle Ben has not been officially referenced in the MCU, since the Tom Holland Spider-Man wasn't an origin story. Apparently, director did want to make a reference to Uncle Ben in Homecoming. Remember that scene where Peter tries on different suits for the dance, and one of them, I guess, was going to belong to Ben, but the scene was cut. Now, we see some shots of Peter departing. The international trailer included more travel shots with MJ going through security too, along with Ned, who is now attached at the hip with Betty Brant. I guess they're together now. Badass. Betty, of course, was the host of that derpy school news show. And in the comics, Betty actually goes on to work at the Daily Bugle for J. Jonah Jameson. You might remember Elizabeth Banks played Betty in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And in the comics, Betty also marries Ned Leeds. But she has a brief affair with Flash Thompson when Ned becomes Hobgoblin. I don't know, just keep your eye on that one, Ned. And before I move on, we see the students in Venice, Italy. And as Betty takes a photo of Ned, check out that boat in the background. ASM 212. That's probably a nod to the Amazing Spider-Man issue 212. That was the issue that introduces the villain Hydro Man, who might show up later in this trailer. So let's move on.
You look really pretty.
Therefore, I have value.
No, that's not
I'm
right.
messing with you. You look pretty too.
I just want to spend some time with MJ. I think she really likes me, dude.
That reminds me when I first fell in love. I had just finished my film called.
In this section, Peter flirts with MJ in a movie theater, and the students check into their Venice hotel, where you can see Martin Starr returning as Mr. Harrington, and JB Smooth's character, another chaperone or guide it looks like. Now, throughout all this, we've been hearing the music of the Ramones' I Wanna Be Sedated, and if you listen closely, the editing worked on a really fun joke here. Ned and Peter enter their room, and the Ramones repeat the I Wanna Be Sedated chorus, but the word sedated gets cut off right as Nick Fury fires his dart at Ned in the neck, sedating him.
Just finished my film called.
Gotta love the wordplay there. Let's move on.
So nice to finally meet you, Spider-Man.
You're Nick Fury.
Put some clothes on. Let's go for a ride.
Is he gonna be okay like that?
Might want to turn him over so he doesn't swallow his tongue.
Glad Nick Fury remembered to use the trank gun and not his other one. Who sits alone in the dark in a hotel room of a couple teenagers? The former S.H.I.E.L.D. director of your nightmares, that's who. But you know, we shouldn't be too hard on Fury for this. It's gotta be hard for a guy like him to trust people.
Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye.
Yeah, got it in there. Now, this really is probably the first time Peter Parker and Nick Fury have met. Fury did not appear in Civil War or in Homecoming, and he and Peter never really crossed paths in Infinity War. Perhaps they will meet in Avengers Endgame, though again, we're probably looking at some timeline resetting or reality swapping. So these would be versions of Peter and Fury who never met. And for those wondering why Peter's Spidey sense didn't alert him to the danger, technically Peter wasn't in danger here, Ned was. So sorry Ned, your safety isn't within Peter's Spidey sense jurisdiction. Moving on.
I think Nick Fury just hijacked our summer vacation.
Awesome! You got gifts, Parker, but you have a job to do. Are you going to step up or not?
Okay, this trailer kicks into spy mode as Fury takes Spider-Man to some base in Venice, probably to debrief him on a mission and maybe hook him up with some new gear. Now, whatever happens in Avengers Endgame, Fury has now taken over this role from Tony Stark, and Tony's absence doesn't necessarily mean he's dead. Like, it could just mean the studio considers Spider-Man a big enough MCU hero to tentpole a movie without Iron Man this time. And more likely, they just don't want to fork out the millions to Robert Downey Jr. to co-star. We see Fury looking out a window, and this is actually the Shard. It's a skyscraper in central London on the south bank of the Thames. Fury is looking out over whatever drama is going down at the nearby Tower Bridge. You can actually see the Shard in the background of the reverse shot when Peter swoops in. And notice how Peter's suit has changed here. It's more red and black, making me think that this is an upgraded suit given to him by Fury. He uses the web gliders again from the original Steve Ditko design of Spider-Man. He used these in the Washington Monument sequence in Homecoming. We also see Fury and Maria Hill shooting at this thing, which looks a lot like the Spider-Man villain Sandman. You might remember a version of him from Raimi's Spider-Man 3, but before we go too deep into Sandman, I'm not sure this is Sandman. I'm gonna go into an alternate theory after we look at the next section.
You're all alone. Your friends are in trouble. What are you gonna do about it?
Okay, there's a lot to talk about here. First, we see what appears to be even more villains. A fiery monster that breaks out of this molten cocoon, and this could be the Spider-Man villain, Molten Man. We also see a water-based villain that could be Hydro Man, which would tie in with that Hydro Man Easter egg that we saw earlier. But isn't it interesting that we're seeing so many villains? We haven't even gotten to the main villain of this movie yet, and that each of these villains seem to be made up from a different natural element. Earth, fire, water. The idea that I'm gonna go with for right now is that these could actually be based on the Elementals. The Elementals are more obscure characters from the Doctor Strange comics. They are ancient beings that wield power over the natural elements. Hydron controls water, Magnum controls the earth, Hellfire controls fire, and Zephyr controls air. Perhaps the villains we're seeing so far aren't Sandman, Molten Man, and Hydro Man. They're figures based on Magnum, Hellfire, and Hydron. Lesser known characters that would be easier for the movie to explain and adapt to screen. But if this were true, where would Zephyr be? Well, look again at the shots of Tower Bridge. Lightning strikes it a few times, and it's odd because the bolts hit the lower drawbridge. That's not how lightning works, right? Lightning is supposed to strike the highest vertical point, like a skyscraper, a really tall tree, an unlucky bird, maybe one of the towers of Tower Bridge, but not the lower level. It's as if the storm is aiming for people on the bridge, the way I fear lightning storms will do to me. So perhaps this attack is caused by some figure based on the elemental Zephyr, an air-based villain to match the other three. And if you look closely at that cloud or smoke, whatever it is, there's almost a humanoid shape in there. Maybe I'm just seeing things. All this said, I think there is still an even simpler explanation than the Elementals, and I'll get to it in a bit. But also in this section, we hear Happy Hogan explain to Peter that he's all alone. Now, this is interesting because he's implying that the other Avengers are absent for whatever reason. Dead. Or in another reality. Or maybe they're just not in Europe. But you have to imagine that if things got too bad, Iron Man, Rhodey, one of the others would come come in to help, so there must be some major reason coming out of Endgame that Peter's all on his own. Oh, dead. Also, we briefly see Peter wearing this new badass all black suit. Maybe it's some kind of stealth suit. Notice how the eyepieces work like goggles that he can flip down over his eyes just by jerking his head. My guess is that Nick Fury could have given him this option. Maybe Fury was taking a note from his old friend Carol Danvers about discretion.
Does announcing your identity on clothing help with the covert part of your job?
Good idea. Trank Dart drags her away, and that's where Captain Marvel has been for 20 years. You can see Fury and Hill in the SUV behind Peter there. Now this scene appears to be set in that carnival location in Prague. You can see the Ferris wheel in the background. That was the one that we saw in leaked set photos and videos. Apparently Peter will face off with Mysterio here. And it could be a nod to the carnival setting that Spider-Man faces Mysterio in the comics. And as Peter faces Hydra Man or the elemental Hydron or something else in the Grand Canal of Venice, we move on to the big reveal of the trailer.
You don't want any part of this.
Okay, here we meet the villain of this movie, Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. In the comics, Mysterio is Quentin Beck, though others have used the alias over the years. He is a master illusionist, known for his fishbowl-style helmet, which we actually see him wearing briefly here. As a former Hollywood special effects artist, Mysterio uses practical magic, hypnosis, toxic gas, literal smoke and mirrors to trick people. He often appears and disappears with green smoke, as he does here. Now, here's the deal with Mysterio. He's totally over the top. Everything's part of the show. And yeah, his costume is kinda goofy. There's a helmet, the big cape, smoke. Actually, when he first appears in the Spider-Man comics, he presents himself as a hero, taking down an evil Spider-Man who was really just him, posing as Spider-Man to make Spidey look like a criminal. And I think that is actually Mysterio's secret agenda here. And what's really going on with these multiple villains. I think they're all elaborate illusions, false flag attacks, created and controlled by Mysterio, so that he can come in and save the day, get all the credit. That's why I think he appears without the helmet here. He wants FaceTime in front of all the cameras. Later, one of the kids describes him as Iron Man and Thor rolled into one. That's exactly what he wants, to look like the popular Avengers in this, perhaps, post-Avengers world. Notice how he arrives almost exactly like Thor did in Infinity War. With that and the cape, it's like he's doing an impression. He has armor and gauntlets that fire beams like Iron Man does. Look closely at those beams. They form these green geometric shapes, almost as if he stole them from Doctor Strange's mystic spells. And look even closer, they ignite from these little green sparks, as if they're produced from practical pyrotechnics rather than real magic. So whether or not Mysterio is gonna call these things Hydra Man, Multiman, and Sandman, or he's gonna call them elementals, I just think they're all big hoaxes. Earth, Wind, Water, and Fire, great music, good for Planeteers, but too neat and storybooky. It's a work of a Hollywood mind. So yeah, I think Mysterio has syndrome. Let's move on to the final clip.
Who is that guy?
He's like Iron Man and Thor rolled into one.
He's no Spider-Man.
What is it with you and Spider-Man?
What, he looks out for the neighborhood, has a dope suit, and I really respect him. Sup, dickwad?
Okay, after an awesome instrumental cover of the 60s Spider-Man theme song, we see all the students watching news footage of Mysterio's rescue. Great joke here with Flash praising Spider-Man while dissing Peter, just like Flash does in the comics. Now, the fact that this other kid mentions Iron Man and Thor by name means that those heroes exist in this timeline. Peter responds to the comment with a doubtful side eye, like maybe he's making this face because he doesn't really see the heroism of Mysterio's actions, or maybe he felt that it was too soon to bring up those guys, maybe because they just died. But to me, really, the casual tone here suggests that Iron Man and Thor are not dead. Like, no one seems sad to think or talk about them. So I'm thinking now that however the Avengers restore the timeline or circumvent the snap, it probably won't require Stark or Thor to sacrifice their own lives. But I don't want to make that promise because look, it's still too early to know how the timeline meddling will work in the MCU going forward. But here's what I will say. There are cats all over this trailer. Maybe, like Captain Marvel's cat, all of the cats in the MCU are actually Flirkins. You know, dimension hopping squid monsters. They look like cats, but they ain't. Blowing up realities and then fixing them so that we can have more Spider-Mans. Just check out one of my recent Captain Marvel videos for explanations of what a Flirkin is. But here's my real question for you guys. Do you think Spider-Man Far From Home's timeline is the result of multiverse hopping, like we saw in Into the Spider-Verse, or time travel butterfly affecting events within the same timeline? Or could all this be some conspiracy with directors and heads of studios all lying to us and Far From Home is actually a prequel. If so, what a lame thing to lie about, right? Comment down below with your thoughts and follow New Rockstars on Twitter at New Rockstars. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Erik Voss. And subscribe to New Rockstars for in-depth breakdowns, explanations, and theories of everything Marvel related. And yes, I was in London recently, but any web slingers you saw were someone else. Oh, I gotta run. Whee!